Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Classical Academy Podcast, your friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Phillips. Listen, gang, before we get started, I want to encourage you, make sure you subscribe, call your friends, family, tell them about the podcast. We want to spread the good news of classical Christian education, the educational hope of the Western world. Our guest today, Keith McCurdy. Keith is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He speaks regularly at schools and conferences in the world of classical Christian education. Keith is based in Virginia, where he enjoys hiking in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. I know after you hear this podcast, you're going to want to know more about Keith. His website is livesturdy, livesturdy.com, livesturdy.com. And I'll repeat that again later, but make sure you write that down. You'll want to get on that website and check out more. Keith recently blessed us by speaking here to the Trinity community on the topic of mental health, teens, culture, and faith. He agreed to join us for this podcast to share some of his insights on that most important subject today. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
We are so glad to have you. You've been in the classical world for quite a while. You've been on the board of a classical world, chairman of
Yes.
the board for 6 years, or out of your eighth, or on the board? Or?
Yeah, I was on a board for 8 years. I was board chair for 6
Wow.
in a classical school, and both of my children are classically educated. One is now 28, one is 24. So I've been involved in the classical world for close to 20 years.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. It is indeed the hope of the educational hope of the Western world. A couple of questions up front. How did you become interested and get involved in classical Christian education? And what do you see, and I know that could be an hour-long lecture, but what do you see as the value of classical Christian education?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, my initial involvement with the classical education is when my wife and I were looking for a good place to educate our children. We're in a good community in Roanoke, Virginia. It was known and still known today, reported good public schools.
Mm-hmm.
But we really wanted more than just a public education. And I was very familiar with a classical school in our town that was just a few years old. And I dealt with faculty from there or families from there as a therapist. And so we went for a visit. My wife went for a visit the very first time. And we were just amazed immediately at just not only what we saw in the students, but really the approach of the folks at the school. You know, they valued us. My wife would reference that when she left the first meeting, the first parent meeting she went to, a dear friend of ours now just asked my wife before she left, she said, "Would you mind if I prayed for you?" And my wife said, "Absolutely." And the entire prayer was for our marriage.
Wow.
And so it really helped us to see that the folks in this community really are looking at grappling with two things. You know, how do we educate our children in the best form possible, which I would argue is a classical world, and I'll give you a way I look at that in a minute.
Sure.
But grounded in God's truth.
Yes.
And really caring for one another with the love of Christ. And so we saw that initially, and so that and that's what, you know, I always hope that parents can see, that both of those things, when blended together, when we have that form of education. You know, people ask me all the time, they say, how do you look at a classical education? How would you define a classical education? And I always laugh because I challenge schools to think about how they say that, and they start talking about the Trivium or Dorothy Sayers, and everybody loses them because they don't know what they're talking about. And the definition I use, I steal a part of it from a good friend of mine, Davies Owens, and I add to it a little bit. And I say, the classical world, classical education is responsible for educating the vast majority of Western civilization up till about 100 years ago. And to date, it has given us the majority of our philosophers, theologians, inventors, entrepreneurs, explorers that we've ever seen. And today, when paired with God's truth, it is the form of education that best prepares our children to live in the real world.
Yes.
The real broken world.
Absolutely.
And I've seen it again and again. I've seen the outcome not only with my own kids, because I work with schools all over the nation. I hear personal stories again and again and again and again about how well prepared our children are, not just academically, but how they're built with character, morality, the ability to demonstrate maturity, which in essence is the ability to live as God calls us when it's hard.
Sure.
And they're better equipped to do that at the next stage than I've seen any other form of education produce.
Indeed. I know part of our mission statement is to produce young men and women of virtue and wisdom and purpose and courage. And it's not just a saying. You really see it. I had a very similar experience. I came 14 years ago to consult. They were starting to develop a science department, and I just was kind of curious and just heard about this classical education thing, and I met these students. And I remember telling God, I'll go anywhere in the world, just don't take me to Southern California.
And here we are.
So I think when people encounter the students and they encounter, as you said, the culture of classical Christian education, they'll realize its value. I know you approach some of the challenges for parents in general. What do you think might be unique to challenges for parents in classical Christian education, if there are any? Maybe there aren't. Maybe they're the same as all the others, but do you see some unique there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of commonality in the struggles we see and how culture is influencing our children, how we raise our children, but I think we really highlight one of the biggest struggles parents have, even more so in the classical world, and that's the ability of parents to be comfortable with their children struggling. Because we know struggle is necessary for growth, yet for the last 2 generations, we have been told at almost every point by culture, by my profession, that it's all about keeping our children happy. Well, I got to tell you, the educational world that really makes you uncomfortable is the classical world.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people, I use the word rigor a lot. A lot of schools use that. Some schools don't use that word.
Yeah, it scares people, but it's
rigor is a great word if you understand really the dual track in a classical school. There's academic rigor, and it doesn't mean we make it hard on purpose. Latin's harder. Omnibus is tough. Doing a thesis is tough work. It really is. It's not what the typical student does in a public system or in many private schools. But the other part of rigor is the fact that this education is immersive. I mean, in the classical tradition, a student would live with their mentor, which meant they experienced all of life with their mentor, all the ups and downs, all the rigors of just life. That's what we do here. We don't let you sit in the back of a classroom from K to 12 and just turn in paperwork and graduate with honors. You have to get your hands dirty.
Yes.
We teach you how. We teach you how to debate, how to argue. Sorry, parents in logic. Yes, we teach them how to argue really well and point out the fallacy in your argument at the dinner table.
Sure.
But that's the other piece of rigor, is that it's immersive. And that's the value in it. Another way I look at the classical world is many people will be familiar with C.S. Lewis and Narnia, the Narnia Tales.
Sure.
And if you're not, this may intrigue you a little bit. You got to read them because they're wonderful. But at one point in the Narnia Tales, Lucy is visiting with the beavers, and they're talking about Aslan, the Christ figure who has come. And Lucy really doesn't know anything about him, and she's listening, and she asks this famous question. She says, "Is he safe?"
Yes.
And we know the answer. The answer is, oh, no, he's not safe, but he's good.
Yes.
And I would argue that definition covers 3 categories. It covers our life with Christ. It's not safe, but it's good, because the world is broken and there is toil in it. It also captures a classical education. It isn't safe, but it's good. It's not safe because we will challenge you. It's tough at times. We want to grow you, but ultimately it produces good in your ability to navigate life with truth in a meaningful way. I would also argue that should be how we describe parenting.
Yes.
It should also not be safe but good. And yet, most of our parents in the classical world, a huge push for them putting their children in a school like this is safety. And I tell parents all the time, you have that backwards. They're not going to be safe here. We're going to challenge them.
Yes.
We like healthy discomfort. And the interesting thing is when we allow our children to struggle in healthy ways, then when unhealthy struggle comes, they're already equipped to navigate it better.
Indeed.
And so I think that that's how I look at what parents deal with in the classical world. We're confronted more directly with the idea of our children being uncomfortable in the educational process than a typical public school student. But I think it's a wonderful thing to be confronted with because it's the essence of growth.
You bet. Well, I loved in your talk this afternoon, you were talking about how Madison Avenue has created commercials from the 50s up until now. And originally they showed you a product, showed you how it worked, demonstrated it. Then by the 80s, it made you feel good. The 90s made you sexy. And then now it creates stress and shows a way to relieve stress with their product.
Yeah.
And then you brought up, of course, the great examples of the child-centered world, and that relieving stress means making them happy. How is this a lie that's been bought into?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, because it is a lie. And I spoke to the students about that today. You think about commercials, and the message we see in so much marketing today to families is a very simple message that's very powerful. And it's that peace comes from pleasing your child. Peace comes from keeping your child comfortable. The lie is this. It's really the lie of the last two generations. And when I speak to about 10,000 teenagers a year publicly. And I ask them, I say, do you all recognize this lie? And the lie is very simply that how you feel is the most important part of who you are. And we hear it in many ways. It's all about being happy, follow your feelings. In essence, what we have done is we've done two key things. We've set up a goal of being happy. Well, the problem with that is what our students take from that often is, if I'm not happy, something must be wrong. Well, that's not true at all. There are times in life when we're not always comfortable.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean something bad's happening. It could still be good. It's just hard. But the other, even more problematic part of that message is that it sets our feelings up to be our compass, to direct us.
Yes.
We've given feelings the authority of running us. Now, why is that a lie? Well, it's very simply this. I don't have to walk through the whole analogy, but I give a very simple analogy of being lost in an alley in New York City, and some guys are running in after you at night and you feel scared. And then being in the experience where you are in your own home, in your own bed, and you dream the same scenario and you're still scared.
Of course.
Or you're watching a scary movie and something jumps and you're scared.
Yes.
What those three scenarios tell us, in the first one, we're actually in danger. In the other two, we're not. But our feelings couldn't tell the difference. Feelings cannot. They can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality. They don't discern truth. So what that means is, for 2 generations now, we have given our children a broken compass. And in my experience with scouting, teaching orienteering, my son's an Eagle Scout. We've been through all this in the mountains with training scouts. The more you follow a broken compass, the more lost you get.
Indeed.
And it fuels a sense of helplessness and hopelessness.
And doesn't the culture feed that? I remember the mid-90s cartoon version of Pocahontas, where her grandmother is channeling through a tree. And I'll never forget, her grandmother says, "Pocahontas, follow your heart."
Right.
And of course, it's follow your feelings.
Follow your feelings.
What she's saying.
Right.
And so, as you said, being aware of that, helping the parents be aware of that, and how classical Christian education addresses this issue and makes the student cognizant of it.
Yeah, we actually speak to what is true, good, and virtuous. And it's interesting because I ask parents all the time, what's the goal you have for your children? And too many times it falls into that narrative. I want my kids happy, want them comfortable, because I've been told by everybody, especially my profession, that it's all about being in a positive emotional state, and that brings them health and all that kind of stuff, which we have no evidence that it does. We actually have the opposite.
Yes.
But I tell parents the goal really should be maturity. And
Indeed.
The way we define maturity is very simple. The ability to know what's right, and when it doesn't line up with how we feel, it's difficult, uncomfortable, or I just don't want to, I'm able to do what's right. It's the ability to demonstrate virtue.
Yes.
The ability to live as we should when it's hard. The problem with that is you can't get there being comfortable. And so that's the crux, I think, of what we do in the classical world, what we attempt to do, and I think in many cases we do it well, because we expose our students. I mean, my goodness, we read pagan books. We read books all about this not being handled well.
Correct. Yes, indeed.
And it really helps us understand the value of character and virtue, morality, all of this.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And so I think that's a huge piece of what I see coming out of the classical world.
Right. So the parents, obviously, they invest a lot of time, energy, treasure to have their kids in a classical Christian education. Do you have specific advice to them? I mean, we've kind of touched on it through the conversation, but if they said, "Oh, can you just give me some advice on navigating this world of my teenager or my grammar school or navigating the world of classical Christian education and the challenges?" And I'm sure they have a sense of being overwhelmed at times.
2 or 3 things come to mind. I have these conversations with parents quite a bit. One is hold firm. It's a wild ride.
Great.
Your children will be up and down, up and down, up and down all through it. I often tell a story. I'll give you a abbreviated version with my daughter, who's now 28. She was often the best critic of the classical world. She would always tell you what's wrong, who shouldn't be teaching, why the uniforms are inappropriate for a girl that's 5'11" because the skirts were too short. I mean, all kinds of different things. And yet she would be the first to tell you that when she stepped out into the real world, how equipped she was.
Wow.
She didn't enjoy going through it at times. At times she did. My son would tell you the same story. My son actually would tell you that he was ready for college junior year. In some ways he was, but in some ways he's getting ready to graduate grad school. He's still not ready. But
sure, of course.
Just because we're all over the place.
Yes.
But it is a messy, wild ride. But as parents, if we understand the goal and the tools we're using to get there, this is when we need to hold firm.
Sure. That reminds me of livesturdy.com. I mean, that's the website makes that message.
It does. And we need to really I encourage parents all the time. It's okay if they're struggling. The key is this. Are they struggling for a good reason? Because if you lean in and talk to the school can probably explain the struggle. They can tell you what they're doing about it, how they're growing your child through it. So just ride through it. So that's number one. Be willing to hold firm on this. It's unfortunate too many times that parents have conversations with their kids multiple years in a row about, do you really want to go back here to school? And it's the parent's decision.
Yes, exactly.
It's not the child's decision. And so really, really be willing to hold firm to this, but understand the value in the struggle.
Fabulous.
That's one. The other is get to know your school. One of the best ways to hold firm in this is to know the school inside and out. Get in the classroom, volunteer for everything you can, show up at all the games and all the competitions. Be a regular in the school. We talk all the time about partnering with parents, but we don't always fully explain it. And the way I fully explain it is this. I say to a school, describe to the parent exactly who you are and how you do things. So much so that they're excited and a little scared. Then you've done it well. Then what you tell the parent, what their partnership is you're supporting the way we just told you we're going to educate your child.
That's fantastic.
And the way you can support it is be in this building. Come to the events, volunteer for stuff, get in the classroom, because that's where parents see the process that is so healthy. And when that occurs, wow, it makes the ability to hold firm on all this stuff so much easier.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, it kind of leads me into another question, because I know sometimes the faculty, the administration, the staff, they need some encouragement. I constantly wonder on graduation day, and I see them, and the tears are in my eyes, and I'm like, Lord, cover them, protect them. Are they going to hold steady? Are they going to live sturdy?
Well, and I will tell you something. That's something else I'll tell parents when they put their child in a classical school. If I know them, I say, well, adopt a teacher. And they say, what do you mean? I say, the hardest job in that school is the teacher. Because think about what that teacher is juggling. That teacher is juggling your child, your faith, and your money. That's a lot to juggle.
Yes, indeed.
And you can take the pressure off by loving on that teacher. A couple things happen. Number one, they're now focused on the right things and loving your child and growing your child. Number two, you create a connection with that teacher. Down the road, there's an issue. You call the teacher, say, hey, can I talk to you about this? They say, absolutely. And you work things together, through things together. And so establish a relationship where you are supportive, prayerful, loving on teachers.
That's fantastic.
If your child's in grammar school, it's that teacher that your child has. If they're in logic or rhetoric, pick a few in the school and just start loving on them.
Wonderful.
And do things for them. It's amazing how that shapes that connection, because the touch point of the school and the family is the teacher and the parent. Well, it's really the teacher and the student, but the parent is overarching that.
Sure.
And so when we can start loving on teachers, wow, it does something very powerful.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And in turn, I know Trinity, the faculty, is quite good about reaching out to the parents, but what specifically, if you're just coming in cold, you don't know anything about a school, what would you say to the faculty? Here's how you can help these parents who are investing so much time, energy, and treasure into their child being here.
Yeah, a couple things. Some directed to the children, students, and some directed to the parents. Number one, I tell faculty all the time, something we didn't talk about today, is learn how to take one step into the life of the student. Not to be the therapist or the best friend. Mm-hmm. Learn to take the right step in. And I often suggest to faculty at the beginning of the year, give a quiz to all your students, ungraded.
Yes.
They have to answer 3 or 4 questions. What's your name? How many pets do you have? What are their names? What's your birthday? What are you involved in? Extracurricular, sports teams, anything. Mm-hmm. Now you have a cheat sheet that sets you up for the whole year. Perfect. So everybody that said they play basketball, make sure you get a basketball schedule. So every time there's a game, the next morning in class, you ask the players, hey, y'all, how'd the game go? Yes. They will be shocked that you know. Every teacher in the school put a calendar on your wall. Every child's birthday goes on that calendar in bright colored ink. It will take less than a week for the students in the classroom to realize you're tracking their birthdays.
That's fantastic.
That just values them. Mm-hmm. I mean, how cool would it be for Johnny to be told 7 times in a day, happy birthday? It didn't take any time to do that.
Wow. But
it demonstrates we spent enough time and energy to learn something about you, and we follow up on it. Mm. We ask you after an extracurricular, after a game. We celebrate your birthday. We ask you ever so often how your dog Lou's doing. I mean, it's so simple.
Sure.
That creates a connection that says to that student, you matter. Because ultimately what students at their core, what all of us at our core want, are 2 key driving forces. We want to be known and loved. Mm-hmm. I know we've heard that before. And
sure.
The problem in today's world, really, in life in general, is we have a facade up. I mean, my goodness, social media is all a facade. So then anybody who says they love us, we know at our core we're really not loved because we know we haven't really shown them who we really are. Mm-hmm. Because the only way we truly feel loved is when a person knows something about us that we've shared that's just real. And so when a teacher asks some questions and gets real information that to the student doesn't mean anything, but then we use it in a real way to acknowledge them as valuable. It's amazing how it begins to tickle that you're known and loved in this classroom.
That's fantastic.
And so I think that's a huge thing. With parents, I challenge schools, and we talked about this today. I challenge schools all the time. Make sure you do things that celebrate relationship with your parents. I tell folks, I say, have a chili cook-off where when they come in, you don't even talk about the school. You don't talk about a program. You don't talk about fundraising. You get on the Goodwill and you get an old bowling trophy. And you rebadge it as the chili trophy. And you have a chili cook-off, and whoever wins gets the trophy. You don't talk about anything else. You celebrate relationship. Mm-hmm. The activity we see in Scripture that celebrates relationship, the common activity more than anything else, is breaking bread together. Mm-hmm. And I tell schools, you have a great resource of coming together as a community a couple times a year and just hanging out and eating good food.
Yeah, great.
That tells your parents, we value you because you're here. Not because you give us anything, not because you show up at a big event. We value you so much, we're going to do something just to celebrate that relationship.
So, as I mentioned earlier, we're producing young men and women of virtue, wisdom, purpose, and courage. There's no guarantees. We hear from the alum, as you said, all the time how prepared they were for school. I don't have a lot of conversations about how prepared for life they are. I would like to have more of those. I'm always the one who brings it up. I haven't had a single alum come to me and say, this is how you prepared me for life, but lots for school, and that's great.
Right.
How can we do our best to try to guarantee that the lessons we're teaching here, not just the academic, but more important, the life lessons, how can we do the best we can to get close to guaranteeing that they carry them forth when they leave this place?
Well, we can guarantee nothing, as we all know.
Yes.
But we can plant the right seeds. And in my experience, therapeutically in my experience, I've been in the field a little over 35 years, licensed in the field for the majority of that time. And it's interesting. I've been in the field long enough. I have students that come back. So students I worked with 30 years ago that are now adults. They come back to me to do their premarital. They come back to me to do career assessments. They come back to me because they just run into a snag of life. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because what I tell parents all the time is that your children will leave your home still cooking. They're not finished.
Right.
And we will not cover every base. But we will provide them with the basic elements of living rightly the basic elements of learning how to figure some things out, how to step back, not be run by our emotions, how to think rightly about some things and wrestle rightly with them, how to seek wisdom. And so what I see, and have seen primarily in the last 10 years, because that's at the age where some of these young adults are coming back to me now, I hear again and again and again and again, man, my parents taught me this and I never listened. Mm-hmm. Or I never saw it until now. But the interesting thing is, in all those cases, all of the raw material at some point came together. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that that's what happens in the classical world as well. And in my world, how I deal with things, the realm in which I operate, I actually hear those stories from students.
Yes.
How the classical world helped them think differently about something.
That I do. When I bring it up, then they talk about
that. Then they
do,
right.
Yes, and they say it's... I think maybe my experience here at Trinity is the reason I very quickly found a church. I think I very quickly sought out Christian friends.
Or I was able not to buy into that lie of culture, or whatever it may be.
Right. I think it's happening. You just have to kind of bring it up with them.
I think so.
Because they think your interest as a faculty member is the academic first. And in reality, I want to know how your soul's doing.
Well, and I would tell you that when we think about Deuteronomy, talking about impressing truth in the lives of our children, we have the outcome of that in Scripture. Mm-hmm. And the outcome is the sheep and the goats.
Yes.
And it's very interesting because Christ is talking to the sheep and the goats, and he says the same thing to both of them. Or they say the same thing back to him. He says, you didn't do this or you did do this. Both said when. Even the sheep.
Yes.
Weren't readily aware of when they were being obedient. That's the evidence that it had been so impressed and immersed in their life that it came out organically. And I think we see that with some of our students or our children that later in life, they're not automatically connecting it, but then when we dig in and talk about it, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that. The evidence isn't always clear. It doesn't mean it's not there.
Mm-hmm. That is so encouraging, and I hope for you listeners out there that you find this very encouraging. Again, the website is livesturdy.com, and I highly encourage you to get on that. Keith, it has been such a pleasure and such an encouragement to have you join us.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a privilege.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us here on the Classical Academy podcast, presented by Trinity U, a service of Trinity Classical Academy right here in Santa Clarita, California. Our producer is Shay Ramquist. Stephen Petrie is our audio engineer, provides the original music you hear right now. So until next time, let's all continue to grow in wisdom, in virtue, and in the love of God.